So I just want to welcome everybody to the program tonight, where we're going to be talking about the field of public policy. For those who don't know me, I'm Kelly Robinson, one of the assistant directors in the Matthews Center for Career Development. And I work with students and liaison with schools and companies in the areas of policy and government and education. And I also work as the pre-law advisor, which is why I'm super excited to be here tonight, because this is a fun, chill group of people who have a lot of information and insight to share with you. Just a few housekeeping items as we're getting started. So again, as I mentioned, if you're able to turn your screen on, we're not going to be having PowerPoints or anything, so it'd be super fun to see people's faces. As I mentioned, also, the program's going to be recorded. We're going to save time at the end for some questions and answers, but certainly if you have questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat. I always like to say, if you've got the question, certainly other people in the audience probably have the question, but if you want to drop it anonymously, you can go ahead and you can send it, directly to me, and I'll be sure to take note and ask that at the end. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. Jessica is going to get us started. Jessica is the Director of Admissions and Scholarships for the Master of Public Policy at the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University, which is the most amazing title to fit on a business card, but I love it. So Jessica, I'll turn it over to you to get us started. Thanks very much for being here, everybody.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us tonight. We're excited to chat with you. So yes, as Kelly said, I'm Director of Admissions and Scholarships, and we are excited to be with you tonight and answer any questions you have. We have a great group of panelists here to chat with you tonight. We have Professor Mac McCorkle. We have an alum. I have to change what I just said from last year. We have an alum, AC Kiesler. We have a second year current student, Emily Rounds. They're both Davidson alums. And wonderful Sanford current student and alumni who we greatly appreciate having in our program and are excited to chat with you too. And Professor Chris Marsicano, who is also a Sanford MPP alum from back when I started, actually, right, Chris? So we go way back, and we're all really excited to chat with you. We also have Mitch Mosty from our admissions team as well here. And so for about the first half of this session, we're going to have our panelists speak a bit. Mac's going to talk a little bit about what is public policy, what careers are pursued with an MPP, what is the difference between an MPP and a JD, what is that policy versus law difference. AC and Emily are going to talk a little bit about their path to Sanford, what they were doing before they got to Duke, why they chose to pursue an MPP in the first place, career goals that they have, and maybe a few reasons why they like the MPP program at Duke and Sanford. And then Chris is also, Professor Chris Marsicano is also going to chat a bit about his journey to Sanford and beyond, and his sort of biggest takeaways from the MPP experience and how his MPP has impacted his career. And then we'll open it up to Q&A, and we want to make sure we answer all of your questions that you have. So we'll get it started. And Mac, why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
Well, thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I'm going to first address the issue of just what is public policy, and then move into the issue of law versus public policy. And 30 years ago, it would have been really easy, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, been really easy to explain that the public policy schools grew out of the perceived need to professionalize governmental positions. So you might want to say bureaucratic positions, but working especially in the federal government was the direction of a lot of major public policy schools. Duke was created in a rush by the Ford Foundation of about 6 or 7 other schools that either they had little programs that broke off and were created as separate schools, but I think it was Harvard, Michigan, Duke, Berkeley, I can't remember them all. But the idea was that you were going to go into government. And so you would work for the Environmental Protection Agency, or you would work for Office of Management and Budget. And again, it would be at the federal level. Maybe you would work for Department of Transportation, maybe the White House. And a number of people who go to public policy schools still do that. But over the last 30 years, the definition of public policy, as you might expect, and just if you reflect on it, has expanded greatly. So that now, really, instead of just focusing on government, you might want to say that public policy focuses on governance in a larger sense, just how society is governed, not just how the government acts, how society is governed. Some people even call it governmentality, just the idea that you might even have large corporations or a very large foundation that could have an impact on public policy, just like government. So it's a broader definition, it's a looser definition, and a lot of public policy schools. Now, one thing I should say that the Masters of Public Administration that you'll see, especially at some major public universities, is still geared to, you go there like at the University of North Carolina, the School of Government, which is a very fine school, and you can get a larger education there, but a lot of people are going there because they want to be city managers, or they want to handle infrastructure problems or city planning. So Duke, I think you can get that because at Duke we have a very good relationship with UNC, and you could take courses at the School of Government. But public policy is about a larger role, and it also had more of an emphasis on analysis than public administration degrees. So one of the things you'll have in public policy schools is an emphasis on, at least at first, economics and statistics, that really helps credential you for a lot of different jobs. The other way I would put it is that when you think about social science research, whether it's sociology or political science or anthropology, whatever, if you're majoring in a social science, there is lots of research involved in public policy schools, but public policy schools are more about problem solving, and there can be some issues with that. Sometimes public policy can rush and not want to deal with theory at all. But a lot of what public policy schools are about, the purpose is clear. You really are working towards some kind of goal and some kind of improvement in society, or you might say, you might conclude, don't change this. So, but there are decisions about really front and center, not just about researching a problem, but fixing a problem. And in that sense, also in public policy, you, not always, but you in many cases are working for a particular client. If your classic job of public policy is public policy consulting for a major consulting firm. I was a consultant on my own working for political campaigns before I came here. And so that helps that you're actually working for somebody. Social science research, pure social science research, you might want to think about, is not for a particular client, and it might not be for a particular problem. You're trying to get knowledge into society about a particular problem, and it might not have that action component that you really have got to have with public policy and client. Now, that segues into the difference between law and public policy, because when you're doing law, almost always, just even from an ethical manner position, you've got to have a client. You know, there are issues about Justice Louis Brandeis is one of our greatest lawyers and Supreme Court justices. But the comment about Brandeis was that he thought the world was his client instead of having specific clients. If you have trouble with that idea, because law is an adversarial profession in the sense that you really are working for a client, that can be a turnoff to people, and you need to consider that. Public policy has some of that, but not as much of that kind of adversarial. But both of them are a little bit more, certainly more client-oriented than you might find in social science research. I went to law school in the early 80s. My decision to go to law school was that I knew of public policy. I knew Joel Fleischman, the director here at Duke, the original director. I worked on papers with Joel. But at that time, I felt like I could still go to law school and be involved in public service. I'd also worked for Terry Sanford, so I worked in his law firm, and I kind of knew the path that I wanted to pursue. there's still an ability to go to law school and do public service. I don't want to act like there's not, but it is the practice of law and law schools. While law schools have gotten way more intellectually creative in the coursework you take, the practice of law and the profession of law has gotten way more specialized. So it's much more of a challenge to say, I'm going to law school and then I'm going to go out and work for the government. You can, because you could work for the state attorney general's office and have a very fulfilling career, or you might work for the attorney general's office for 5 years, and then a private firm would want you and your expertise. So there are paths, but when you go to law school these days, you need to say, I can see myself practicing law. If you're public service oriented, but you think, oh, I just need that law credential, or I need the greater credential that law gives to it, that's not a good idea. If you can't see yourself taking the bar and at least working for 5 to 10 years in a law firm, my usual advice, unless there's some special reason, is don't think about law, but think about public policy, because the public policy orientation, the public service orientation is still way stronger in public policy. Also, I'll just tell you bluntly that I taught at Davidson for a half semester back in 2011. And I tell this story that I saw this student after I'd graded some papers just charging at me in the library. And I thought, oh, I remember he didn't get the highest grade by a long shot. This guy's coming after me. And he came up to me and said, Professor McCorkle, that was the best grade I've ever gotten at Davidson. He wanted to give me a hug. So at Davidson, I know how tough it is. And so when I was director, I basically told Jessica, anybody with a half decent grade at Davidson is going to do great here, because they really have been through it a lot on that. But the great thing about public policy that I think is when you come here, there's a focus on grades, nothing like there was at Davidson, but there really is a focus on learning. If I came in to a public policy program and had to take stats and economics, that would almost assure me of not finishing top in level in my class. That would be eat your spinach time over and over. And so it really, and we don't care about grades. We want you to make good grades. But I had the employer, Deloitte, actually, at dinner one night tell me, Mac, if somebody has a 4.0 at your program, I don't want to hire them because they've done some weird things to get a 4.0. So really, you're coming here for learning, and learning. You can concentrate, but you can also be a generalist. At law school, the problem at law schools is it really does matter whether you have a 3.7 or a 3.65 or a 3.82. Here, that distinction really doesn't apply. And a lot's going to be determined by your capstone project, your work experience during the summers. So I find it, to be honest, a way more healthy atmosphere than law school. That's not to say that law school can be intellectually challenging. There are great courses in law school, but there's a grade consciousness that I think is really tough. And then finally, law school, again, if you go to law school, you're probably going to work and you've got to pay off debt. The trap of the game is you're going to need to go to a big law firm and make a lot of money. And making a lot of money is totally fine and good. But what policy school will offer you is not as much money, but a far more diverse array of jobs. You can come out of Sanford or any other good policy school, go to the federal government, as I said, traditionally, a lot of people do. You can go to state or local government. You can go to an international NGO. You can work for an education nonprofit, or you can start your own. Or as Professor Marsicano has shown, you can go to Davidson and teach. So it just opens up a lot more doors. Maybe not as remunerative in that sense, but also usually with a way better, I think, life-work balance. I'm really glad I practiced for 3 or 4 years, learned a lot, think that was important that I did that. I still carry around my accordion files from my law practice, but I'm glad I moved away from law, and I've loved being back in public policy at Sanford. So that's my speech for the night.
Thank you so much, Mac. And yes, Mac refers to himself as a recovering lawyer, and as he likes to say. Thanks so much, Mac. That's super helpful. And next we'll kick it to AC.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Mac. Every time you do that speech, I learn something new. My name is AC Kiesler. I graduated from Davidson in 2020. Kind of a crazy year to graduate, but I was a public health major through the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies and a Hispanic Studies minor. The reason I went CIS was because I scratched off all the ones I didn't want to do and made my own. I really liked health, but I knew that to me it was interdisciplinary. And so when you have a topic that is interdisciplinary, the solutions are also going to be interdisciplinary. And so I combined that major out of anthropology classes, biology classes, economics, political science, all over the board, and really, really enjoyed that experience. While at Davidson, I interned in DC at a health policy research tank, and then the next summer at the United Nations Foundation on their advocacy team. So I was on the Hill in briefings. I was tracking bills from the UNF side. So I had touch points with policy along the way, but it wasn't until I went abroad to Argentina my junior fall. I went on a public health program that I learned I needed to go gain the tools to do policy. I was on the ground with a lot of Red Cross workers. I was in clinics with a lot of doctors, and that was really exciting to me, but I could tell the missing piece of the puzzle was the policy. And so got back to campus, took Dr. Marcia Cano's intro to policy analysis course. I took an econ course, just went ahead and put myself through that to prepare myself for Sanford, and got along with a senior thesis that used 3 policy models to analyze sexual and reproductive health in Argentina. So found my way to policy, and knew through Davidson that I was needing to prepare myself to go to grad school. That decision came about a little bit earlier due to the pandemic, but I wouldn't have changed anything about the experience. So I went straight to Sanford starting that fall. And I think it was one of the best choices I have made. I think the next, why I chose an MPP. So as I mentioned, I was interested in public policy. I was deciding between that and an MPH because there are a Master of Public Health, because there are ways that you can specialize in policy on the MPH side. But I had a lot of discussions with people who had gone through Sanford or gotten their MPP at another program. And the range of things you can do with an MPP, like Max said, is very broad. And that was appealing to me, especially being younger, knowing that that was going to be a really big tool I was investing in, and I wanted it to do as much as possible for me. My career goals. So right now I am a couple months into a job in the government contracting or consulting space. I thought Mac was going to come for me earlier when he mentioned that. But I am working for a federal agency as my client. It's project-based, like he mentioned, and client-based. So week to week, I have multiple meetings with government clients, and I'm working on the private sector side to do problem solving. And I use my degree every single day. So my career goals are to keep doing this because I really am liking what I'm getting out of it right now, and how I'm getting to use my degree. I'm on a tech policy project. I've not done anything related to tech policy, but I am learning a lot and loving to get the policy angle in a different environment. And then 3 reasons why you like the MPP program. I messaged Emily briefly earlier, hoping we didn't overlap, but we'll see how this goes. One, the people, and Emily might say this too, but that's my number one. When I arrived at Sanford, of course, it was kind of a weird time. We were virtual for a little bit and then became hybrid and then became in person. But my class, I noticed, got I think, closer because of that experience. The people that I met there were exactly like the friends that I had left at Davidson. And I was really, really pleased with how that transition was and the support that I had at Sanford. And that's not just the friends, the peers I had, but the professors as well. Second, Sanford has a big emphasis on client-based projects, and I'm happy to talk about this later, but there are a number of classes that either engage local community groups or encourage you as a student to go find a client, whether it's in your local community or in your kind of community of interest, broader community of interest, but you work and problem solve for a purpose. And I appreciate that Sanford does that, because it brings the classroom a little bit closer to the real world. And that has definitely helped me in my work now. And the last thing is Durham. I miss Durham, North Carolina. So this is another thing when you're thinking about a degree program, is where you want to be for 2 years or 2 years plus, depending on what route you want to go with it. I love North Carolina. I'm from Charlotte originally. Davidson was not too far a jump, but Durham was an amazing fit. I was virtual for my internship between the first and second year. So I spent a whole summer in Durham and really had the best experience there. Got to live with Emily Rounds the next year. Nothing could be better. So that's my intro. I'll pass it over to Emily and then get back into it.
Awesome. Thank you, AC. Yeah, my reason why I went to Sanford is to live with AC. So that's there and that. So at Davidson, I was a Hispanic studies major. I wrote my senior thesis on an ancient medieval Spanish pilgrimage, so I can't say I'm using that a ton today, but I absolutely loved that, wouldn't change it, but also wouldn't change my master's experience. I frankly didn't know what an MPP was until I started thinking more about master's programs, and Chris helped me a lot with that going into my senior year. I had dabbled in a few different areas of study at Davidson and eventually landed at Hispanic studies because I absolutely loved the faculty. I would not trade that for the world. And they're all gems, and I felt like it really gave me the place to express myself through language and through being able to learn another language and write and gain those writing skills really well and critical thinking. But what I started to realize was the path that I was basically taking is through dabbling in psychology and psych research at Davidson, and then education policy, is that I was really interested in higher ed. And I love higher education. So of course I went and got more school right after undergrad. But I worked with the College Crisis Initiative, which Chris and Sam founded. And that was the best experience. It really made a pretty crappy time during the pandemic a whole lot better. And I got to work with incredible people, gave me a really positive group project experience. So that was really good. And I knew that I wanted to continue into the higher ed space, but I needed to get the tools and the quant chops in order to do so and feel confident in doing that. And I think this might be plagiarizing something that Chris has said to me, so this might be copying him, but I think, like, when I think about my two educational experiences, is that Davidson taught me how to think, and Duke is giving me the tools to be able to put that thought into action into my career. So sorry, I think that's probably what you were going to open.
You stole my spiel, Emily.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I've heard it a few times, so now I'm taking.
It's okay. Sanford taught me how to think on my feet, so I'll come up with something.
Okay,
better.
there we go. Exactly. So I absolutely knew that I needed to get some of those harder skills. And what I will also say is that my master's experience is definitely very different than undergrad. So something I would caution is, if you are looking to just like think about the reasons why you would like to do more higher education after your undergrad degree, because it is really different. It's going to be very different, very tailored, specific to what you want to do. So I would say, and of course there's room for being a generalist. I'm a policy generalist. And I found that that's the best track for me, because I want to learn from other disciplines, because it's all related to higher education in the end. Students' lives are impacted by a transportation policy and health policy and economic development and such. But it's also really good to have some goals that are flexible to change even, but to be pursuing that degree for. So instead of just doing more school, having those goals and having that long-term trajectory kind of planned out in your head was really helpful to me. I also applied to some MPA programs, and ultimately I decided that MPP was going to be my number one choice because a lot of the MPAs are 1 years, and frankly, I didn't feel like I could take all the courses that I wanted to in 1 year. And I also wanted to have more flexibility, like Mac was describing, of being able to have more choice of where I went in my career. So that was really beneficial. And Sanford I chose because I felt like I would be surrounded by people who came from a lot of different areas of experience, and it was going to be very welcoming, which it was. And I have learned both so much from my courses, but then also from my classmates. For example, I have a lot of friends who are interested in K-12 or early childhood policy, and that has informed a lot of what my perspective going into the higher ed space, even though I haven't taken specific courses related to K-12 policy necessarily. My career goals after graduation is to pursue higher education policy. So somewhere in the intersection of advocacy and then research as well. And I think that the MPP has really equipped me very well to set myself up for that. And what I love a lot is that it really does meet the intersection of research and advocacy, because you're not doing just one or the other, and people are very passionate about both. And to be able to back up advocacy with data and the skills to do that well and to communicate with people. The Career Center is also great. Marian Pratt is a goddess, and I met with her so many times last year going into the internship process, prepared me so well, and I felt like it was a really natural continuation from the Davidson Career Center to the Sanford one. And 3 reasons why I chose Sanford and love the MPP still is, I'm going to copy AC's of the people. I think that it really, the classmates that I have in my cohort are like the same personalities and interests, and meeting kind of like the lovely nerdiness of all of my favorite Davidson people, and just more of them all in one place. I also really appreciate how I've been able to have a balance of qualitative and quantitative skills. Mac taught me how to rewrite basically in Public Policy 803, which is our intro policy analysis course. And that has really informed every other memo I've written, which is so helpful. And the quant skills have been great. And I also really wanted the generalist perspective, as I said before, learning from my peers. And then Mac buys me avocado toast and coffee about once a month from the Law Cafe. So that's another big plus. So free food. Yeah, so that sums it up for me. So Jessica, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to both AC and Emily. Every time I talk to either of them, I'm reminded of how much I love Davidson students, and Chris, of course. So like every Davidson student we've ever had has been truly wonderful. And I'm like, yes, we need more of that, right? So that's why we're here tonight. So, and then as Mac and he kind of earlier kind of talked a little bit how Davidson doesn't seem to have as much grade inflation as other places, and we are fully aware of that. So we are fully aware of that. But like I said, every Davidson student we've ever had has been so great. So we definitely want more. And I think listening to AC and Emily talk, and as next you'll listen to Chris Professor Marzicano talk, shows you why we love them, and shows you why we want more students from Davidson. So I think next year maybe I should start off with an informal poll at the beginning and sort of see like who's considering law school at the beginning, and then see if that has shifted more to MPP by the end, or
a little pre-test, post-test.
Yeah. I think we should do it next year. I was thinking that when Mac was talking, I was like, oh, we should have done the before and then the post. Mac McCorkle dissuading, getting them over to the MPP side, or of course we have a dual degree option too. So with that, I shall turn it over to Professor Marzicano.
Thanks, Jessica. I just want to say how much I love the people on this Zoom, and the place that is Duke, and the place that is Davidson. Em did shamelessly steal, although she gave me credit, the statement, but I stand by this, which is when I think back upon my educational opportunities, Davidson is the place where I learned how to think. where I learned how to question authority, where I learned how to think critically and push for what I thought was right and good in the world. But I left Davidson not knowing what to do with those skills, not knowing what to do with the way, the way that I've been taught how to think. And Duke, and specifically Sanford, and professors like Mac, who, I'm going to age him, was my advisor in the Sanford MPP program. Professors like Mac really taught me how to put those thoughts into action. I love this place, and I sing its praises every time I can, and I love it so much. I'm actually in a hotel in Washington, D.C. right now at the American Enterprise Institute K-12 working group. I'm not supposed to be in the hotel. I'm supposed to be at a plated dinner with like state superintendents and senators and stuff, and I'm choosing not to be there because I care so much about this relationship between Davidson and Duke, and the long-standing track record we have of sending Sanford not just our best and brightest, but people who want to change the world, people who believe that they have in themselves the capacity to make a difference, a disproportionate impact in the world. And therefore, if they get just that extra little bit of training that an MPP allows and fosters, they can make a big difference. So I will point out a couple of differences between my path and the path of AC and Emily. I did not go to Duke straight out of Davidson. I actually worked for a little bit. I applied to Duke straight out of Davidson. I was fortunate enough to be offered an opportunity, but I was so burnt out after my 4 years at Davidson. I needed to think in a different way. I needed to have a different experience. And so I worked actually in the admission office at Davidson for a little bit. And I traveled across the country recruiting Davidson students, and it was wonderful. But that actually gave me two things. One, an understanding of what it's like to have a job, which, I'd had internships and things like that before, but having a real live, like, professional 40 plus, it was really more like 60 plus hours a week job, helped prepare me to be able to handle a master's degree program. Because unlike Davidson, where you are in college to identify what it is you're passionate about and really go for Hispanic studies or public health or gender studies or economics or biology, whatever it is, and you're trying out different hats to sort of determine who you're going to be when you leave college. When you go to grad school, when you go to a master's program, you're focused on gaining the skills you need for whatever you're going to do in your post-grad school life. And so it is in many ways like a job, and treating it like a 9 to 5. I don't think anyone actually works at 9 to 5 anymore. Treating it like a 7 to 8 is probably one of the things I'm really thankful I worked beforehand. I thought leaving the admission office that I wanted to be Josh Lyman. There was a show called The West Wing, where Josh Lyman was this like political consultant in the White House, effectively. I wanted to be like Josh Lyman, but with better hair. Like, I wanted to go run political campaigns. And I'm very fortunate that when I came to Duke to learn how to do that there were advisors there and people there who said, yeah, that's a great life. You're living on a couch every 2 years, and you don't know where your next job is going to be. And it's going to be really hard to have family and friends, but you go do it, Chris. And that made it very, very clear in terms of professional development, in terms of personal development, that I had a community around me to help me identify what it is I cared about. Well, I cared about having a family. I cared about having friends. And like Emily, I cared about higher education. And I was very lucky to take a seminar from one of the people who I think is one of the most creative minds in education policy, Charlie Clodfelter. Truly one of the most creative educational policy researchers. If you take, there are two classes that I teach at Davidson: critical issues in higher ed and research methods in education, where I use a lot of his papers. He and his research assistants counted up the number of obituaries that said Roll Tide or War Eagle or Go Duke or Go Heels, to show the disproportionate impact higher ed has on even people who don't go to college, right? So like the majority of people who say Roll Tide in their obituaries, who care about Alabama football, didn't go to Alabama. That shows us that this higher education enterprise matters. And so I was lucky enough to take a class with him and learn about this world of colleges and universities, and how we can get people into the workforce, how we can get them the skills they need to change the world. I was just hooked. And so I was also there. I had the opportunity to work for Duke's Federal Relations Office. I was a lobbyist for a little bit. That was kind of cool. And had this incredible opportunity, this rich experience where the entire faculty, staff, and student body of the Sanford School seemed to care about me, seemed to care about making sure that I could be successful in the ways I wanted to be successful. And I think that is a very rare place. Now, Jessica and Mac are professionals. Emily and AC just left Sanford. Emily's still at Sanford, so they can't say what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it, which is there are a lot of public policy schools out there where you are one of 200. Where you are there for a couple days a week, but you're really doing your job otherwise. And the community is not the same as at Sanford. Emily and AC have both mentioned how strong the relationships are you will have with your friends and your cohort mates. I second that with one caveat. It's not exactly like Davidson because you're not just with people your own age. So if you come straight out of college, you're going to be in the same classroom as an FBI, as a former FBI agent, as a lieutenant colonel in the Marines, as a person who's been a Teach for America teacher for 5 years, as a person who worked for the EPA, right? Like it is always a good idea to be the least experienced or the least knowledgeable person in a room, because then you're going to learn a lot. And one of the great things about being a Davidson graduate at Sanford, especially if you come into Sanford 2 or 3 years out of undergrad, or if you come straight out of undergrad, is you are going to have the skills to think critically, to work in teams, to do the kind of work that you're used to at Davidson, but you'll have the great gift of being able to learn from your cohort mates, not just in the classroom, but out of the classroom too, because they have some fun. Like, don't get me wrong, like it's not all work. But the point is you will have the opportunity to really engage with and become friends with and become colleagues with people who are going to go on to do big things and really have those connections in a way that a lot of other programs, it's just not the case. I have many friends who've been at other institutions. They just don't get that personal touch that I've seen every person I've ever sent to Sanford and every person in my cohort at Sanford do. I mean, I still have Zoom meetings with Jen Danielle, who's a friend of mine, who graduated my cohort. She went to Loyola Chicago undergrad, and Loyola just joined the A10, and so I was really excited that we were going to be able, like, I was going to have her down at Davidson. We were going to go to basketball games together. And then she went and took a job in the Midwest after leaving the Triangle after 7 years. She couldn't have done that a year later or two. But the point is, these people are like the godparents to my child, right? Like, they are the best of us. And to be in a place where you get to be with the most dedicated people who want to make a difference in the world. You've already had that experience a little bit at Davidson. The Sanford School and an MPP program in general, but especially the Sanford School, is like that on steroids. And I've rambled enough, so I'll stop talking now. But I reserve the right to jump in and correct anything Max says about my experiences at Sanford.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Marsicano. And we want to make sure we have a little bit of time to answer any questions that all of you have too. One thing I did want to mention, I know I at least said this last year in this session last year, Mac did a really wonderful job earlier of kind of distinguishing between the JD and the FUP and policy versus law. I don't know. I guess I won't put you all on the spot and ask, for a show of hands of how many are, no judgment, still considering law school at this point, or even a dual degree, potentially getting both degrees. But one thing I do always say when someone tells me they're either thinking about law school or considering the dual degree or trying to decide between the 2 degrees, at least on the law school side of things, the question I just asked, just to get their most immediate response, is, do you want to practice as an attorney? And right now, that's an important question to ask yourself, because I think that law school, for some people, it has become such a default thing to do. Like I'm not totally sure what I want to do next, so I'm going to go to law school. Like, it can't hurt, it can only help me, and why not? But that's not entirely true. If it's not necessary for the job that you want to do, it's not really, worth your investment of time and money to it's not a short degree. This is a large investment of time. It's usually quite a large investment of money that you will have to pay back eventually, largely, a lot of the loans that you're going to take out probably to do that. And so if the jobs that you want do not actually require a JD, it is just, I'm interested a little bit in taking some law courses or things like that, where you don't make sure you have a career reason, a very specific career reason. It ties to what you want to do as a job, that it requires the law degree, or it really is extremely helpful to have this background in legal knowledge. And a lot of the things that our students want to do who think about law school doesn't actually require a JD. They could get the MPP, be out sooner, start having a salary sooner, start having impact sooner, and going to law school really would not have added much to that or helped them get to where they are in the job that they want to do. So just think really clearly, think very carefully about, do you actually want to practice as an attorney? Generally, if you get a law degree and you do want to practice, you'd be doing it immediately and for quite some time for the foreseeable future, probably at minimum. I mean, I guess Max said 3 or 4 years, maybe. Like I thought it would probably be more like 5 to 7, probably at minimum, before pivoting. And of course you can pivot later. Generally, while there are exceptions, people don't do something else first and then try to go back to practicing. And certainly Kelly and Matt can correct me on that, but to think really carefully about how necessary it is for the jobs that you actually want to do and what you want to be doing on a daily basis, because otherwise it's just a lot of money and time spent on unnecessarily. What I would say is, if you are just interested in taking some law electives, you can do that, which is when you're in the MPP program. The law school is right across the street from us. Duke Law is right across, like less than a 5-minute walk. So easy. You just walk right across the street, and our students do take classes there. Some of our professors teach cybersecurity, courses that are joint. We have cross-listed courses with law too.
I took a cross-listed course.
There you go,
Chris. Higher education law.
Yeah. And so if it's just more of an interest, like you're have some interest, would like some background knowledge, but you don't need the full-fledged JD. You're not going to go get up. You're not going to get barred. You're not going to practice. You just want to have some background knowledge. Then do the MPP, take some law school courses, take some law electives right across the street. Very easy to get there and do that. And our students do. And so if you do not need it, it's a lot of money to pay for something you don't need. It's a lot of time and money to spend on something you don't need. So I always want to put that out there. It just so happens that myself and a couple of other colleagues on our academic programs hallway all have husbands who are attorneys who regret going to law school. So while my husband does practice now, if he could go back in time, would not have gone to law school and would have done something else entirely. But it's a lot of debt to be in after for a very long time also. So just making sure you have good solid reasons. If you intend to practice, certainly you need to go to law school and get the JD and get barred. But there are plenty of jobs that our students want to do that do not require a JD, and the MPP will be perfectly sufficient to help them, give them the background they need, give that policy analysis and data analysis and all the things that will help them in their jobs. And so just think very carefully about why, if you do pursue that law school route, why you're doing it, and that there's a clear job reason that it's necessary, essentially.
Yeah, I want to jump in, if that's okay,
Yeah.
and second something that Max said at the top of all this, which is the client focus of law. You still have a client focus often in public policy. I'll give an example of that in a second, but because of the client focus in law, it makes it harder to think about big policy problems, like big issues. So my wife is an attorney. I think she's a pretty good one. I don't know because I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really, but I think she's pretty good. But she's a healthcare attorney, and among her clients are several large research medical centers. And so she is often dealing with cases where instead of creating federal policy around what it means to have a standard of care at end-of-life decisions, she's getting district court judges to give her client the opportunity to change who has custody over a patient. It is incredibly taxing work. Not that that's not a reason to do good work, but it's incredibly taxing work for an individual one person at a time solution. And that's important work. It's really important work to do that. And I'm thankful that we have people like Michelle who do that. I have always been personally more interested in the bigger scale, the grand scale, the being able to make systemic change, not just individual change. Now, that is not to say that lawyers can't make systemic change through individual cases. They do all the time. That's basically what Brown versus Board was 5 individual cases that made systemic changes, right? But the ability to come up with a policy, evaluate it, understand how it works, and then get the lawyers to legislate it for you. That's what policy analysis and public policy is all about. The ability, the opportunity to make big, broad scale change, and then tell the lawyers what to do so they can make your broad scale change into actual law. So that's always fun, telling lawyers what to do. Although I don't do that at home because I don't want to be divorced.
That's good advice, Chris. So we'll open up the questions to you, all of you. Feel free to, you can either put it in the chat if you'd rather do that, or if you want to just unmute yourself. We're a pretty small group here tonight, so feel free to do that too. We're a very informal, not shy group here, so don't feel there are no bad questions here tonight. And while you're thinking about your questions, maybe one question, and it could be, your question can be for anyone on this call tonight, but I'll ask first Emily, AC, and Chris for some words of wisdom to prospective students and applicants considering MPP. What would you tell them? What do you wish you had known at this stage when you were thinking about it? What's something that would have helped you? Something you wish you had known, whether it was before you applied, after you applied, before Sanford, after Sanford. Words of wisdom in general. I'll let you guys. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I see Jaden has a question. Do we want to start with her and then maybe get to that question?
So I just wanted to ask about, like, because I heard a lot about like the distinctions between like law school and then like public policy schools, and like about like jobs at least, like once you graduate and then you're going out to like find a job. But I just wanted to know more about like at least like the learning distinctions. So like if you're going to like law school, like what are you like mainly, are you just gaining knowledge, or like what would like versus like public policy, like you said, like there's action involved. So like I guess what is the main distinctions between like learning in like law school versus like public policies?
Well, one way of thinking about it is law school has diversified its courses in many respects, but the staple of law school and the way you learn is you learn through reading cases, literally different decisions that have been made by courts. And whether it's environmental law, whether it's constitutional law, whether it's torts or contracts, you're going to be drenched and immersed in case law. And that is a very practical way of learning. And as Chris said, you know, as his wife could tell you, being able to know how to interpret cases in favor of your client basically is a lot. What we will in public policy, I will every once in a while assign a court case for people to read, but I also assign court case studies, newspaper articles, academic pieces from political science, history, and interdisciplinary approach. So if you like the idea of case law and getting reading decisions from Brown v. Board to boring tax decisions, but liking the idea that they're authoritative statements from courts and you're learning how to use those, almost weaponize those for clients, that's still the main staple of law school. I would say the public policy in that sense is a little bit more academic, a little bit more research based. When you talk about research in law school, you're researching cases and gaining more knowledge about case law. So I hope that distinction helps in terms of a learning approach.
Yeah, I'll add that the tool sets are very different that you learn. So in both law school and in a public policy program, you're learning a skill set, right? So like you at Davidson, you've learned sort of critical thinking and you're going to become an expert in a particular content area. right? So education studies would be the major that I teach in the most. But if once you get to either law school or an MPP program, law school is teaching you how to interpret cases, how to argue cases, how to support your client in the various different kinds of law that you would have to deal with. Torts, civil law, criminal law, et cetera, et cetera. Public policy is a set of tools that spans disciplines that can be applied to lots of different things, right? So the reason economics is important is because that's the language policymakers use, right? Understanding cost benefit, understanding supply demand, understanding equilibrium, like these are core concepts. It's like learning Spanish or learning French. You have to be able to be fluent in these concepts in order to speak sort of policy speak. You learn statistics to evaluate programs. You learn sort of history, how did we get to where we are today? You learn policy analysis, which is just a completely different style of thinking, right? Like you are learning how to identify a problem, come up with criteria to assess solutions to that problem, come up with solutions, and then providing solutions, right? Providing a recommendation on the solutions, weigh each of the solutions against each of the criteria. So the variety of skills you'll learn in a public policy program, there's just more of them. Now, the trade-off is lawyers get really, really, really good at understanding case law, right? And if you want to be really, really good at statistics, or if you want to be really, really, really good at economics or any of the tools you have in a public policy program, you can do that, but that takes additional specialization, right? There's the broadness of a public policy program means that you're using your brain in different ways and you're getting a lot of different skills, but that you may not dive deeply in any one skill. I tend to think that gives Davidson students a pretty strong advantage in terms of being able to cope with and learn from programs like a policy program, because that's what we're trying to do at Davidson, right? You have your ways of knowing, you have your JEC credit, your cultural diversity credit, all that. I mean, that's what the liberal arts is. So I think that if you like that style of liberal arts learning that you're getting at Davidson, I want to continue learning in that same style, but with a new skill set, then a public policy program is a really great fit. If you want to drill down in one skill set or two skill sets and be really good at those, there's a JD, a PhD, there are other programs. Don't get a PhD. Before you decide to get a PhD, come to my office. Let me talk you out of it. If you still want to do it after I try to talk you out of it, then I'll support you 100%. We'll get you into a great program. But the skill set that I have, that I use on a daily basis, even in my job as a professor, 95% of it I learned at Davidson and Duke, not in my PhD program. Like easily 95%, maybe even more. And so, I'm a good teacher because of professors like Mac. I'm a good researcher because Davidson and Sanford taught me to think bigger about policy issues, not because I had lots of statistics in my PhD program. So I think that's a key difference. And if the question is, what will I learn and how will I learn? That's a big key difference, is one skill set versus a broad skill set. Focus in on one individual issue at a time versus trying to solve a lot of issues at once.
Thank you so much for that, both Mac and Chris. Great responses. Any other? Sam, do you have a question?
Yeah. Sorry if there's like commotion in the back. But yeah, nice to meet everyone. My name is Sam Olusu. I am an alum of Davidson. I graduated in 2021. After Davidson, like Emily, I was in the same class with Emily, and also supported some research with Dr. Marsicano through C2I, sort of working with Emily to direct other undergraduate researchers. And I currently work in sort of research policy relevant research at the Ford School of Public Policy. I'm a research analyst for the Education Policy Initiative. We're a research center based out of the Ford School, and we sort of leverage administrative student level data housed at the state level to look at sort of evaluating programs for the state. So I'm currently working on 2 projects sort of relative to that. But I guess since I've been sort of bitten by the research bug, what are the opportunities for sort of supporting faculty members research? Like I know, at the Sanford School, there's a myriad of program evaluation going on, like notably the baby's first year evaluation with Dr. Lisa Ganeshan. And so I'm just thinking about opportunities for students to engage within their first couple of years on faculty program evaluation research. Like what does that sort of relationship building look like? And in addition, I guess like my second question is to Chris's point about, you know, treating it like a 9 to 5. Like I work a 9 to 5 now, and I like it now. Like I kind of do like this life of, you know, going to work and leaving. So what would your advice be to students coming in about sort of balancing that? Because I think Davidson does have a, you know, heavy emphasis on, you know, 75% of our time is outside of the classroom, and it's like very easy to fall into working and trying to be involved and being all those clubs. I did that, you know, and I got burnt out, like Chris said, like, and so that's why I went to work. So I guess my first question is about sort of that faculty research part, but the second question is about, you know, that establishing that work-life balance, because, you know, we're still learning and growing as people. So just wonder if folks could if I could pick your brains on those two things.
I'm happy to jump on that first part. Part of my like financial aid package and a lot of students' financial aid packages are an assistantship. And you can do a teaching assistantship, a research assistantship, graduate assistantship. Every year the numbers vary, so I can't promise you get to choose the exact one you want. I'm saying that for Jessica and Mitch. But my first semester, I was a research assistant to a professor who did higher ed policy, actually. She taught the politics course, the intro politics course. I struck up a relationship with her and was able to do research with her that second semester. So I was doing kind of little jobs that she needed me to do throughout the semester. And then towards the end of the semester, ended up writing with her. And eventually that was able to get published. That was an assistantship granted to me by Sanford that I got paid for, which was a really exciting opportunity. Again, that is not guaranteed to every student. That was something that I got fortunate the first semester that there was a research assistantship available, and that I got paired with it. But I will say that outside of that, I think professors are pretty, if they have room and are able to take you on, they want you to keep learning. And so I've known professors who will let students do research for them. Again, that's not compensated. It's not an assistantship, but it is an involvement. And I would say that professors are very, very open to doing that. As to the second part of your question, the 9 to 5 schedule, Emily Rounds is the model that I used for the 9 to 5 schedule. I think you're in a good place wanting to be able to balance your schoolwork, but also your outside life. Coming from Davidson, it's a hard transition, but I think you're trying to figure it out with people around you as well, and that was helpful to have those support mechanisms to be able to talk about, okay, when are you stopping work? You know, what are you making time for today? Do you want to make time for a walk? But again, Emily Rounds helped me out my second year with that.
AC, I was going to supplement something you said as well. So in addition to the research opportunities with faculty, the Sanford School is also it houses a bunch of different centers, which also means that at the centers, you have a ton of researchers who they may not be faculty, but they're doing invaluable work. Mac actually has a great spiel about Sanford's focus on practitioners in addition to academics. And there is really something to be gained by doing research work with faculty in a more traditional academic-centric way, but also getting to work with analysts, researchers, practitioners in the centers. Some of our students' closest relationships with research have actually been working with the folks who run centers, the administrative heads of centers. So that's also an opportunity that exists here just because of the make and model of the school.
That's one thing I'll jump into and say is that one of the things I valued about in my Duke Sanford experience was all the faculty, whether they be from the sort of traditional PhD academic track or whether they, were from, were career EPA administrators or what have you, they have lived this life. Like they've actually done the work of policy analysis and policy making. That is a very different setting than a lot of policy schools. And that's a very different setting than Davidson, right? So like if you look at your faculty, with some notable exceptions, most of us went to grad school and have been faculty ever since, right? And so it is a different experience to go to a place where you've had people, like I'll use Mac as an example because he's here. You've had people who have run campaigns for governors, right? And political campaigns for governors. Or I think about one of my professors who's no longer there because I think he's retired. Tom Taylor, is he back?
He's still here, but he's not teaching. Yeah.
Not teaching. Yeah. So like Tom was the legal counsel for the Department of Defense on 9/11. So like he'll take you out and tell you stories about what it was like to be in the Pentagon on 9/11 and who took control and how they, managed the leadership. And so when you are learning from these people, you're not just learning based on theory, you're learning from real life experience. And that the ability to do research with practitioners, the ability to learn from practitioners just from being, grabbing a grilled cheese sandwich. That was my move. Avocado toast is the move now. But when back in the days before avocado toast was a big thing, it was the grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup at the law school. That was the way to go. Whether it's having, grilled cheese and tomato soup and talking through one's life story, or just having them in a classroom, that when the faculty are telling you this is how it works, that's actually how it works because they've lived that life. And
Samuel, I would tell you, I know Ford is a really good school, but we got to get you out of the cold. It's just, I was playing tennis today. I don't know, maybe you can play, maybe it's all right in Ann Arbor right now. But the other thing, and I don't know about Ford, but the other thing you want to look at, especially when you're looking at policy schools, is a lot of policy schools, PhD programs overshadow now their master's programs. We have a small PhD program, but I think implicitly what we're saying is the ability to work with professors and the willingness of professors to have MPPs working with them is very strong at Sanford. And I'll say this because it's my alma mater, but for instance, it's not as strong at Princeton. That's mainly the research there is mainly reserved for PhDs. So you want to compare as schools on that. And I think Sanford compares very favorably in that regard. I just published a paper on North Carolina politics with a recent Sanford grad.
I'll agree with everything Mac just said on that, is that at a lot of schools, policy schools, including the one where I got my PhD, which was not Duke Sanford. You can come to my office and look at the degree on the wall if you want to know what school it was. Master's students are treated as sort of a funding subsidy for PhD research because you pay tuition, and that tuition goes and turns into PhD stipends. That's not how it is at Sanford, right? So like the Sanford school, the MPP students are the focus. And to a lesser extent, the undergrads are the focus. The PhD program is a great program. They're great faculty and students in that program, but the MPP is not a cash cow for the PhD program. It is a focus of the school. It is in many ways the heart of the school.
Thank you all for that. I know we're running over. I didn't know if Emily wanted to, it seemed like she was going to jump in before to talk a little, like maybe a little snip about the work-life balance piece, and then we can sort of wrap up because I know I want to respect everybody's time too and thank everyone tonight.
I'll also say I worked part-time jobs both during my fall and spring semesters. And I know Mac's gonna hate that I'm saying this because he told me not to do it. But if you find like for me, that was helpful because working like 10 to 15 hours a week doing like retail for something that I already knew, I worked at a running store. That was an outlet for me that helped me stay on track and was able to have some more spending money, but ultimately decided against doing that for my second year because I wanted to focus more on the master's project. But that is an option, but it's also the TA-ship, RA-ship, GA-ship is also super helpful. And ultimately was why I was able to stop part-time work as well.
Thanks so much for that, Emily. Chris, did you have something to add?
I just want to say we didn't really talk that much about the master's project, but I think it's an incredibly important part of my personal development, and I think of most students' development. So my master's project was a client-based project. I helped a small HBCU in Dallas called Paul Quinn College, whose president is a Duke alum. I helped them navigate a process to get some additional federal funding. And the way that I mean, as I've gotten older, I've seen that the world is increasingly small, because my Davidson advisee who graduated last year, Nick Baker, is now a special assistant to that same president. So the same person who sort of mentored me and sort of taught me how to think about policy is now teaching a former student of mine how to do that. And so that, I think that's both an endorsement of how important and how great that master's project is, but also an endorsement of what Emily and AC and I have all been saying about the community that is Sanford alums, especially those with Davidson ties. We take care of each other. Before y'all got on the call, we were all cutting up. It's like a reunion every year when we do this, because it's fun to see these people. I miss these people. And so if that's an experience you want, then I think an MPP, and especially Sanford, is one that is worth pursuing.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. We didn't really get to the words of wisdom part, although that was some words of wisdom right now. Any last words of wisdom from Emily, AC, Mac, anyone on the call, really?
Feel free to reach out. I think the best way to learn if you want to do a degree program is to talk to people who've done it, or at least talk to people who have the jobs that you want to do and figure out how they got there. So please feel free to reach out to myself, Emily, and I'm sure everyone on the panel.
I agree with AC that's the advice that I normally give too. Like, think about the jobs that you are interested in and try to talk to people who are actually doing those jobs, because what you think they do and what they actually do on a day-to-day basis may be really different. And you won't know that until you talk to them. So
if I just want to tie into that career perspective is, what I was going to say when we were talking about the difference between like practicing law and working in public policy. And so when students come to meet with me as a pre-law advisor and they want to talk about becoming a lawyer, I will talk to them about why they're interested in that and talk about what their interests are. And so rather than going from the perspective of, I want to find a lawyer to speak with, I will encourage, think about what areas of interest you have. Is it health? Is it education? Is it disability advocacy? What would it be? And let's find people who are working and doing things in those topic areas. And in addition to taking a look at what their current role is, what have they done leading up to that current role, and what was the education route that they pursued? And it may be law and it may not be. And very oftentimes it's so diverse. And very oftentimes policy is reflected. And so, students, alums, if you have questions about you're hearing okay, yeah, I have to talk to people, but I don't know how to do that. And I don't know how to find those people. I mean, you've got a panel of great people here who've dropped their contact information in the chat, but then also let's chat about how you go about finding people and how you go about reaching out to them to have those career conversations, because they're so important.
Thanks so much for that. And, I really wanted the focus of this conversation tonight to focus on the panelists here. And I think that what they have to say is so important. So we did not really focus on any admissions questions or application questions or things like that. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer those too. But I feel like hearing this was more important than those we can answer anytime. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions like that. Otherwise, I just want to really thank so much all the people on this call today, especially all our panelists, certainly all of you for joining us too. But I hope you can, more than anything, feel how much we just enjoy each other and like each other. And this is what our school feels like. And so if we want you to walk away with one thing, it's that feeling. I hope that you can feel through the screen there. So with that, I'll do a quick reminder that our app deadline is January 5th. 5 p.m. Eastern is our deadline. And yeah, otherwise we hope that we'll see some of your applications soon, and we look forward to reviewing them.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate all of.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.